The rain came down in sheets that Tuesday afternoon, drumming against the windshield of the 12-year-old sedan that Sarah Mitchell had been calling home for the past 6 weeks. In the back seat, wrapped in 2 worn blankets and clutching a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days, her 7-year-old niece Maya slept fitfully, her small chest rising and falling with each breath. Sarah watched her in the rearview mirror, feeling the familiar ache settle deep in her chest, the kind of pain that had become as constant as breathing since the accident that took her sister and brother-in-law 3 months ago. The parking lot they occupied sat behind a 24-hour grocery store on the edge of town, one of the few places where security didn't immediately chase away people sleeping in their cars. And Sarah had learned the rhythms of survival quickly. Park after dark, leave before the morning manager arrived, use the restrooms when the overnight clerk was busy, keep the windows cracked just enough for air, but not enough to invite danger. Never stay in the same spot 2 nights running unless absolutely necessary. Her phone, balanced precariously on the dashboard with 18% battery remaining, showed 3 missed calls from her mother. Sarah knew what those calls meant. More pressure, more judgment, more suggestions that she give Maya to foster care, that she admit defeat, that she stop being stubborn and face reality. The reality, as her mother saw it, was that Sarah had no business trying to raise a child when she couldn't even keep a roof over her own head. But Maya was all she had left of her sister, and Sarah would sleep in this car for the rest of her life before she let strangers take her. The job at the diner had ended 2 weeks ago, not because she'd done anything wrong, but because the owner's daughter needed work, and family came first. Sarah understood that, even as she felt the last thread of stability snap. The unemployment checks weren't enough. The savings she'd scraped together over years of careful budgeting had evaporated with funeral costs, and the security deposit she'd lost when her landlord discovered she was harboring a child in a studio apartment zoned for single occupancy. She'd applied everywhere: fast food chains, retail stores, cleaning services, warehouses. Most places took one look at her car packed with belongings and Maya's booster seat and offered polite rejections. The ones that didn't reject her outright paid minimum wage with shifts that made childcare impossible to arrange. She'd tried explaining about Maya, about the guardianship paperwork still crawling through the courts, about needing flexibility until things stabilized. But flexibility cost employers money, and Sarah had nothing to offer in return. The phone buzzed again. This time it was her brother, Daniel. She let it go to voicemail, already knowing what he'd say. The same things everyone said: that she was being irresponsible, that Maya deserved better, that sleeping in a car was no life for a child. As if Sarah didn't know that. As if every morning she didn't wake with her back screaming from the awkward position she'd slept in, choosing the passenger seat so Maya could stretch across the back and feel the weight of her failure pressing down on her shoulders. She was 32 years old, and this was what her life had become. The rain intensified, turning the parking lot into a landscape of puddles that reflected the sodium lights in wavering orange pools. Sarah pulled her jacket tighter around herself and reached into the glove compartment for the protein bar she'd been saving. She broke it in half, ate her portion slowly, and saved the rest for Maya's breakfast. Dinner had been the free samples at the grocery store, a piece of cheese and some crackers, eaten while pretending to shop. Her phone buzzed with a text notification. She almost ignored it, assuming it was her mother or Daniel following up. But something made her glance at the screen. It was from an email address she didn't recognize, forwarded from one of the job sites she'd posted her resume on weeks ago. The message was brief. Municipal auction this Saturday, item 47. Might interest you. No one else bidding. Bring cash. Sarah frowned, her finger hovering over the delete button. Scam, probably. Or spam that somehow bypassed the filters. but something about the phrasing stopped her. Municipal auction. She'd never been to one, but she knew they were real, where cities sold off old equipment, foreclosed properties, abandoned items seized by the state. She opened her browser, wincing as the battery percentage dropped to 15, and searched for municipal auctions in her area. Sure enough, one was scheduled for Saturday morning at the county administration building. She scrolled through the catalog of items, most of which were vehicles, office equipment, and furniture. Then she found Item 47. Cold War-era fallout shelter, underground structure, abandoned by federal government. Property of county since 1992. Located 14 miles west of town center on former military reserve land. Sold as is. Buyer responsible for all inspection, cleanup, removal, or modification. Minimum bid, $1. Sarah read it 3 times. An underground shelter. Something with walls and a roof, or at least a ceiling. Something that wasn't this car. The description was sparse, offering no details about size or condition, only a set of coordinates, and a note that the entrance was sealed with a county lock that would be removed upon sale. Her heart began to beat faster, a sensation she hadn't felt in months. Hope, or something close to it. She calculated quickly in her mind. If she could get there Saturday morning, if she could place the minimum bid, if no one else wanted a forgotten hole in the ground on abandoned land, she might be able to secure it for exactly $1. She had $17.38 in her wallet. It wasn't much, but it was enough for the bid and a few gallons of gas. But even as the possibility took shape, doubt crept in behind it. An underground shelter from the Cold War era would be old, possibly dangerous, almost certainly without utilities. There would be no running water, no electricity, no heat. It might be flooded or contaminated, or structurally unsound. Taking Maya to live in a place like that could be worse than the car. It could be criminal. Still, her eyes drifted back to the rearview mirror, to Maya's sleeping face pressed against the blankets. The bruise on the child's forehead, unearned 2 days ago when she'd bumped into the doorframe climbing into the car, had faded to a yellowish green. Her lips were chapped from the dry air, and her hair, which Sarah tried to comb every morning with a travel brush from the dollar store, had tangled again despite her efforts. This was no life either. The rain drummed harder against the roof, a sound that had become as familiar to Sarah as her own heartbeat. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, then faded into the night. She closed her eyes and thought about her sister, about the way Julie used to laugh, loud and uninhibited, about the way she'd always believed Sarah could do anything if she just tried hard enough. "You're tougher than you think," Julie used to say. "You just don't know it yet." Sarah didn't feel tough. She felt brittle, like something that had been bent too far and was about to snap. But she also felt something else, buried beneath the exhaustion and fear. Determination. A stubborn refusal to give up that had kept her moving forward when everything else screamed at her to stop. She saved the auction information to her phone, plugged it into the cigarette lighter to charge, and settled back against the seat. Saturday was 3 days away. 3 more nights in this parking lot. 3 more mornings of washing up in grocery store bathrooms. 3 more days of rationing food and avoiding her family's calls. But maybe, just maybe, it was also 3 days until something changed. Maya stirred in the back seat, mumbling something Sarah couldn't make out. She reached back and adjusted the blankets, tucking them more securely around the small body. Maya's hand found hers in sleep, gripping it with surprising strength, and Sarah held on, feeling the warmth of the child's fingers against her cold palm. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to Maya or herself. "I promise. I'm going to figure this out." Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the parking lot clean of the day's grime, and Sarah Mitchell, homeless and desperate and terrified, made herself a promise. She would go to that auction. She would bid on that shelter. And if she won it, she would make it work. Because the alternative, giving up, was no longer something she could afford to consider. The days that followed moved with the strange elasticity of time that comes from having nothing to do but wait. Sarah took Maya to the public library each morning once it opened, where they could sit in warmth and use the bathroom without drawing suspicious looks. Maya worked through coloring books Sarah had picked up from a church donation box, while Sarah researched Cold War-era fallout shelters on the library computers. What she learned was both encouraging and terrifying. The shelters had been built during the height of nuclear paranoia in the late 1950s and early 1960s, designed to protect citizens from radioactive fallout in the event of Soviet attack. Most were small, utilitarian spaces equipped with basic ventilation systems, thick concrete walls, and heavy blast doors. Many had been abandoned after the Cold War ended, left to decay or filled in by property owners who saw them as liabilities. The ones that survived were sometimes repurposed as storage, wine cellars, or even eccentric homes for people willing to live underground. But most simply sat forgotten, sealed and silent beneath the earth. Sarah studied photographs of restored shelters, trying to imagine what Item 47 might look like. Some were surprisingly spacious, with multiple rooms and sturdy construction that had weathered decades of neglect. Others were cramped, damp, claustrophobic spaces that looked more like tombs than refugees. She had no way of knowing which type awaited her until she saw it. On Friday afternoon, with the auction less than 24 hours away, Sarah gathered the courage to call the county administration office. A woman with a tired voice answered, and Sarah explained she was interested in Item 47. "The fallout shelter," the woman said, her tone suggesting this wasn't the first inquiry. "You know it's sold as is, odd, right? County assumes no responsibility for condition or safety." "I know," Sarah said. "I just wanted to confirm the location and find out if there's been any recent inspection." "Hold on." The sound of shuffling papers came through the line. "Last inspection was in 2007. Report says the structure is intact, but the interior condition is unknown. Access has been sealed since the county took possession. You'd be buying it blind." "Has anyone else expressed interest?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice casual. The woman laughed, though it wasn't unkind. "Honey, in 20 years, you're the first person to even ask about it. Most people don't want to deal with the liability. Place could be full of water or asbestos or who knows what. And it's on land that's zoned as wilderness reserve, so you can't develop it or sell it. You can use the structure, but that's about it." Sarah's heart sank slightly. No ability to sell meant no ability to convert it into cash if things went wrong. But it also meant fewer competitors at the auction. "One more thing," the woman added, her voice softening. "I shouldn't probably tell you this, but the coordinates put it pretty far from the main road. You'll need a vehicle that can handle rough terrain, and there's no utilities out there. No power, no water, no septic. If you're thinking of actually using it, you'd need to be prepared for primitive conditions." "I understand," Sarah said quietly. "Thank you for the information." After she hung up, she sat in the library's parking lot with the engine running to keep Maya warm, staring at the steering wheel, while doubt whispered in her ear. No utilities, no inspection, no way to know what awaited inside. Was she really considering taking a 7-year-old child to live in an abandoned underground bunker? But then she looked at Maya, who'd fallen asleep again in the back seat, and at the dark circles under the child's eyes, and at the way she'd started to flinch whenever strangers approached the car. What was the alternative? Keep sleeping in parking lots until winter came? Wait for Child Protective Services to get involved? Call her mother and admit defeat? No. The shelter might be a risk, But it was a risk with a ceiling and walls. It was a risk with the possibility of becoming something better. And right now, possibility was all Sarah had. Saturday morning arrived cold and gray. Sarah used the last of her quarters to buy Maya a hot chocolate from a gas station, while she filled the tank with $8 worth of fuel. They arrived at the county administration building 40 minutes before the auction began, and Sarah was surprised to see nearly 24 people scattered across the folding chairs set up in the meeting room. Most were older men, some in work clothes, others in casual business attire. A few couples whispered to each other while studying the auction catalog. Sarah recognized the types, people who made a living buying government surplus and reselling it, contractors looking for cheap equipment, bargain hunters hoping for a lucky find. She and Maya took seats in the back row. The child sat quietly, swinging her legs and clutching the stuffed rabbit, occasionally looking up at Sarah with wide eyes. But Sarah squeezed her hand and tried to project confidence she didn't feel. The auctioneer, a heavy-set man with a booming voice and a manner that suggested he'd done this 1,000 times before, called the room to order. Items moved quickly. A police cruiser went for $1,500. Office furniture sold in lots of 3 and 4. A set of road signs went to a man who owned an antique shop. Sarah's heart pounded harder with each passing item. When the auctioneer finally called item 47, she felt sweat prick at her palms despite the cool air. Cold War fallout shelter, the auctioneer read from his notes, his tone suggesting bemusement. Underground structure on former military reserve land. Sold as is, no guarantees, no inspections. Buyer assumes all risk and responsibility. County will remove the lock and provide coordinates. Cannot be resold. Land remains county property. Minimum bid is $1. Do I have $1? Silence filled the room. Sarah could feel the skepticism radiating from the other bidders. Several people exchanged glances. One man actually laughed. "Come on, folks," the auctioneer said. $1. Surely someone wants a piece of Cold War history. More silence. Sarah felt her throat constrict. This was it. The moment. She raised her hand, feeling like she was jumping off a cliff. "We have $1, the auctioneer said, pointing at her. "Do I have 2? No one moved. The room remained silent except for someone coughing in the front row. $1 going once, the auctioneer continued. Twice. Sold to the lady in the back for $1. Just like that, it was over. Sarah felt lightheaded, uncertain whether she'd just made the best decision of her life or the worst. She approached the payment table with Maya in tow, handed over a single dollar bill, and received a receipt, a set of coordinates, and a form releasing the county from all liability. The clerk who processed the paperwork, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, looked at Sarah with something like concern. "You know what you're getting into, honey?" "Not really," Sarah admitted, "but I don't have a lot of options." The woman glanced at Maya, then back at Sarah, and her expression softened further. "There's a hardware store on Route 9 that rents generators cheap, and the food bank on Elm Street is open Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. I'm not supposed to say this, but you look like you could use some help." Sarah felt her eyes burn with unexpected tears. Thank you," she managed. "Good luck," the woman said quietly. "I hope it's better than you think." By the time Sarah and Maya left the building, the morning had brightened slightly, thin sunlight breaking through the clouds. Sarah programmed the coordinates into her phone, and they began the drive west, leaving the town behind and heading into the rural lands beyond. The landscape changed as they drove, becoming increasingly wild and empty. Paved roads gave way to gravel, then to dirt tracks rutted by rain and time. The GPS insisted they were on the correct path, but Sarah saw no signs of civilization, only dense woods pressing in from both sides, and the occasional glimpse of rocky hills through the trees. After 40 minutes of increasingly rough driving, the GPS announced they'd arrived. Sarah stopped the car in a small clearing and looked around. There was nothing here. No structure, no entrance, no sign that humans had ever touched this place. "Where's the house?" Maya asked, her voice small and worried. "It's underground, sweetheart," Sarah said, trying to sound confident. "We just have to find the entrance." They got out of the car, and Sarah immediately felt the isolation of the place. The woods were thick enough to muffle sound, creating a bubble of silence broken only by wind rustling through bare branches. The air smelled of dead leaves and damp earth. The temperature had dropped considerably from town, and Sarah wished she'd brought warmer clothes. She studied the GPS coordinates again, then began walking in a slow circle, eyes scanning the ground. Maya stayed close, clutching the stuffed rabbit with both hands. For several minutes, Sarah found nothing. Then, at the base of a small rise in the land, partially hidden by overgrown brush, she saw it. A concrete structure, barely visible beneath decades of accumulated debris and vegetation. It was low to the ground, no more than 3 feet high, with a flat top that sloped slightly to allow water runoff. In the center was a heavy steel door, painted green, but now mottled with rust and lichen. Sarah approached slowly, her heart hammering. This was it. The entrance to her $1 purchase. The thing she'd bet everything on. The county lock hung from a metal hasp, exactly as promised. Sarah pulled the key from her pocket, the one the clerk had given her with the paperwork, and fitted it into the lock. It resisted at first, corroded by years of exposure, but eventually turned with a grinding sound. The lock fell away, and Sarah stood there, hand on the door handle, suddenly terrified of what she might find inside. "Is it scary?" Maya whispered. Sarah knelt down beside her. "I don't know yet, baby, but we're going to check it out together, okay? And if it's too scary, we'll figure something else out." Maya nodded, her trust in Sarah's words absolute despite everything. That trust felt like a weight and a gift all at once. Sarah took a breath, gripped the handle with both hands and pulled. The door fought her, stuck in its frame by decades of rust and neglect. She braced her feet and pulled harder, muscles straining. Slowly, with a sound like a groan of protest, the door began to move. Stale air rushed out, carrying the scent of old concrete and earth and something else, something metallic. When the door finally swung open, revealing a set of concrete steps descending into darkness, Sarah pulled out her phone and activated the flashlight. The beam cut through the shadows, illuminating rough walls and a corridor that dropped away into unknown depths. "Stay close," she told Maya, then began to descend. The stairs were steep and slick with moisture. Sarah counted 13 steps before they leveled out into a small landing. The flashlight beam swept across a narrow corridor with walls made of poured concrete, the surface rough and cold. The ceiling was low enough that Sarah, at 5'6", could reach up and touch it without fully extending her arm. The corridor extended about 15 feet before opening into a larger space. Sarah moved forward carefully, testing each step, one hand trailing along the wall for balance. Maya pressed against her leg, breathing fast, but trying to be brave. They emerged into what appeared to be the main room of the shelter. Sarah's flashlight revealed a space roughly 20 feet by 15, with a low ceiling supported by thick concrete columns. The walls were bare concrete, though someone had painted them white long ago, and the paint now peeled in long strips, revealing dark patches underneath. The floor was concrete as well, surprisingly level and intact. Against one wall stood a series of metal shelves, empty and rusted. In the corner, a ventilation shaft disappeared up through the ceiling, and in the center of the room sat a heavy wooden table with 4 metal chairs, their legs spotted with rust, but still upright. Sarah swept the light slowly across every surface, taking inventory. No visible water damage, which was better than she'd feared. The walls showed cracks, but nothing structural. The air, while stale, didn't smell of mold or sewage. It was simply old, undisturbed air that had been sealed away for decades. "It's like a cave," Maya said quietly. "Kind of," Sarah agreed, though cave didn't quite capture the deliberate human construction of the place. This was a space built for purpose, designed to sustain life when the world above was rendered uninhabitable. Looking at it now, she tried to imagine the era that had created such a thing. The fear of nuclear war that had driven people to dig into the earth and stockpile supplies. She found a second doorway at the far end of the main room, narrower than the first. Ducking through it, she discovered a smaller chamber, perhaps 10 by 10 feet, empty except for another set of shelves and what looked like an old chemical toilet in the corner, its plastic yellowed and cracked with age. A third doorway, smaller still, led to what must have been a storage area. Here, the ceiling was so low Sarah had to crouch. The space was filled with debris, old boxes soggy with moisture, collapsed cardboard, scattered papers too degraded to read. She backed out and returned to the main room, where Maya had climbed onto one of the chairs and sat swinging her legs, looking tiny and vulnerable in the vast underground space. "What do you think?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Maya considered the question with the seriousness children bring to important matters. "It's cold and dark." "It is," Sarah agreed, "but the ceiling doesn't leak, and the walls are strong. We could bring down some lamps, get a heater, make it warmer." "Can I have my own room?" Maya asked, pointing at the second chamber. Sarah felt something crack in her chest, not breaking but shifting, a fissure that let light through. Her own room, such a small thing to want, and so impossibly far from their reality. "Maybe," Sarah said carefully. "We'd have to clean it up first, and figure out how to get power, and see if it's even safe to live here." Maya nodded, accepting this as she accepted most things Sarah told her. Then she asked the question that had been hovering between them for weeks. "Is this home now?" Sarah crossed the room and pulled Maya into her arms, feeling the small body against hers. The trust and need radiating from the child like heat. She thought about the car in the parking lot, about the cold nights and the fear of police flashlights and the constant anxiety of being discovered. She thought about her family's judgment and the job applications that went nowhere and the grinding, daily humiliation of having nothing. Then she looked around the shelter, at its bare walls and cold concrete and underground isolation. It wasn't much. It wasn't anything close to what Maya deserved. But it was shelter. It was privacy. It was theirs, at least for now. "Yeah, baby," Sarah said quietly. "I think it is." They spent the next hour exploring every corner of the shelter by phone light, taking mental inventory of what would be needed. The list was daunting. Lights, blankets, a heater, food storage, water containers, and cleaning supplies. The ventilation shaft appeared intact, which meant fresh air could circulate, but Sarah had no idea if the old fan system still worked. They'd need a generator for power, and that meant fuel, which meant money she didn't have. But she'd figure it out. Somehow, the way she'd figured out everything else. As they prepared to climb back up the stairs, Sarah noticed something she'd missed on the way down. A pattern on the wall near the bottom step, barely visible in the dim light. She moved closer, directing the flashlight beam at it. Someone had carved something into the concrete. Not recently, the marks were worn smooth, but deliberately. A series of letters and numbers. She couldn't make out all of them, but she could read. Level 1 access, and below that, an arrow pointing to the right, toward the wall itself. Sarah frowned. Level 1 suggested there might be a level 2, but the shelter appeared to be single-story. She'd seen the entire space. Unless… She moved to the wall where the arrow pointed and ran her hands along the surface. It felt solid, indistinguishable from the rest of the concrete. But when she knocked on it lightly, the sound that came back was different. Not quite hollow, but not as solid as the other walls. A chill ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. She knocked again, moving along the wall's length, 3 feet of solid concrete, then a section about 4 feet wide where the sound changed, then solid concrete again. Her pulse quickened. She pressed her palms flat against the different section, feeling for any irregularity. At the junction where solid wall became suspect wall, her fingers found something. A seam, almost invisible, running vertically from floor to ceiling. Maya tugged at her jacket. "Aunt Sarah, can we go? I'm cold." "Just 1 more minute, sweetheart," Sarah murmured, her attention fixed on the wall. She followed the seam down to where it met the floor and found another running horizontally. Then she traced the opposite side, confirming what she'd begun to suspect. This wasn't part of the original wall. This was a section that had been added later, built to match the surrounding concrete, but not quite succeeding. Someone had sealed something off here, deliberately, professionally, and they'd done it in a way that would only be noticed by someone looking very carefully. Sarah stood back, her mind racing. Cold War shelters sometimes had multiple sections, but sealed off to create separate zones for supplies or decontamination. But the crude marking on the stairwell, the hidden seam, the way this section had been concealed, it all suggested something more purposeful than standard design. "Aunt Sarah?" Maya's voice carried an edge of worry now. Sarah shook herself. The wall would still be here tomorrow. Right now, Maya needed warmth and food, and they needed to get the car unloaded before dark. "Sorry, baby. Let's go back up." They climbed the stairs into afternoon light that seemed almost painfully bright after the shelter's darkness. Sarah secured the door behind them, her thoughts still circling around that sealed wall and what it might mean. As they drove back toward town, Maya fell asleep again, exhausted by the morning's strangeness. Sarah let her rest and focused on planning. On first priority, make the shelter livable. That meant lighting, heat, and basic supplies. The hardware store would have what she needed, but funds remained desperately tight. She'd have to get creative. Call in every favor she had. Maybe visit the church donation center again. See what the food bank offered. Swallow her pride and ask her brother for a loan, though the thought of his judgment made her stomach clench. But beneath the practical concerns, something else hummed in the back of her mind. That wall. The seam hidden in shadow. The marking that suggested levels when the shelter appeared to have only one. What had been sealed away down there? And why? Sarah Mitchell had spent weeks feeling like she was drowning, pulled under by circumstances she couldn't control. But now, driving away from that isolated clearing with Maya sleeping peacefully in the back seat, she felt something shift. It wasn't quite hope, not yet, but it was close. A sense that maybe, just maybe, the shelter she'd bought for $1 held more than just concrete walls and cold air. Maybe it held possibility. The week that followed tested every ounce of Sarah's determination and resourcefulness. She spent the first day making the shelter marginally more habitable, using what little she had. She bought a cheap camping lantern from the dollar store, a pack of tea lights, and a pair of emergency blankets. The total came to $11, leaving her with less than $6 in her wallet and a quarter tank of gas. But it was enough to make the shelter feel less like a tomb. The camping lantern cast a warm glow across the main room, and the emergency blankets, spread over the metal chairs and on the floor, created small islands of warmth against the concrete cold. Sarah found an old tarp in the storage area and used it to cover the entrance to Maya's chosen room, giving her at least the illusion of privacy. Maya, for her part, adapted with the resilience of children. She arranged her stuffed animals on the metal shelves, designating each one a specific spot as though setting up a home. She used chalk Sarah had brought from the library donation box to draw on the concrete walls, creating colorful but crude pictures of houses and flowers and smiling stick figures. She asked fewer questions than Sarah expected, seeming to understand that the answers weren't ready yet. The biggest challenge was water. When Sarah made multiple trips between the shelter and the nearest gas station 8 miles away, filling 2-gallon jugs and a collapsible camping container she'd found at a thrift store for $3. She rationed carefully, using water only for drinking and essential washing. Bathing became a luxury they couldn't afford. Food came from the food bank on Tuesday, a box of canned goods, dried pasta, a loaf of bread close to expiring, and a jar of peanut butter. It wasn't much, but combined with the samples Sarah strategically collected from grocery stores, it was enough to keep them fed. At night, with Maya curled up in her nest of blankets in the small room, Sarah lay awake on the concrete floor of the main chamber, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the sealed wall. She couldn't shake the image of that hidden seam, the deliberate concealment. During the day, while Maya colored or played with her animals, Sarah found herself drifting toward that section of wall, running her hands over the surface, trying to understand what lay behind it. On Thursday, 5 days after moving into the shelter, Sarah made a decision. They couldn't continue like this indefinitely. The shelter was shelter, yes, but without heat or proper facilities, winter would make it unlivable. She needed income, and that meant finding work. Any work, even if it meant swallowing her pride completely. She left Maya at the shelter with strict instructions not to open the door for anyone, drove to town, and began applying everywhere again. This time, she was honest. She told potential employers about Maya, about living in the shelter, about needing flexibility. She expected rejection. What she got instead, at a small family-owned diner on the edge of town, was unexpected kindness. The owner, a woman named Rosa, with gray-streaked hair and laugh lines around her eyes, listened to Sarah's story without interrupting. When Sarah finished, Rosa asked just one question. "Can you work the breakfast shift? 5 a.m. to 1 p.m.? Yes, Sarah said immediately, though she had no idea how she'd manage mornings in an underground shelter with no alarm clock or electricity. Okay. You start tomorrow. Minimum wage, plus tips. You can bring the kid with you on weekends if you need to, long as she's quiet. And there's always leftover food at the end of the shift. No sense throwing it away." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you. I won't let you down." Rosa waved a hand dismissively. "Everyone needs help sometimes, Mija. I just show up on time and work hard. That's all I ask." That night, Sarah allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in months. Relief. Not security. Not yet, but at least a path forward. With work, she could start saving. With savings, she could buy a generator. With a generator, they could have light and heat. It was a slow climb, but it was a climb upward. She celebrated by using a few precious dollars to buy Maya a happy meal, which they ate in the shelter by camping lantern light. Maya's joy at the small toy that came with it, a plastic figurine of a cartoon character, made Sarah's heart ache. "This is the best day," Maya declared, clutching the toy. Sarah pulled her close. "It's going to get better," she promised. "I'm going to make it better." After Maya fell asleep, Sarah returned to the sealed wall. She hadn't told anyone about her suspicion that something lay behind it. Part of her worried it was nothing, just a quirk of the shelter's construction. But another part, the part that had carried her through the last months of hell, insisted there was more to discover. She moved the camping lantern close and examined the seam again, this time more thoroughly. The concrete that filled the hidden section was slightly different in color, a shade grayer than the surrounding wall. Old, yes, but not as old as the original construction. Whatever had been sealed here had been done years, maybe decades, after the shelter was built. Sarah knocked along the wall's length, mapping the boundaries of the sealed section. It was roughly 4 feet wide and extended from floor to ceiling. Not a closet. Not a small storage nook. If something was back there, it was a space large enough to walk into. The realization sent excitement and fear coursing through her in equal measure. What if it was just empty space? Or worse, what if opening it compromised the structural integrity of the shelter? But what if it wasn't empty? She thought about the marking on the stairwell. Level 1. Access. The implication being that there was something beyond level 1, something deeper, or at least something hidden. Sarah made another decision. Tomorrow, after her first shift at the diner, she would buy tools. A chisel, a hammer, thick work gloves. She would start carefully chipping away at the seam, testing whether the wall could be opened without destroying it. If she could create even a small opening, she could shine a light inside and see what, if anything, waited there. The thought kept her awake longer than usual, mind spinning with possibilities. What did people hide in Cold War shelters? Supplies, probably. Maybe weapons, though that seemed dramatic. Or maybe nothing at all. Maybe the whole thing was just paranoid Cold War preparation, a redundancy that had been sealed off and forgotten. But as she finally drifted toward sleep, the concrete floor hard and cold beneath her, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something waited behind that wall. Something that had been hidden for a reason. And in 3 days, she would begin the process of uncovering it. The first shift at Rosa's diner was brutal. Sarah woke at 4:15 in pitch darkness, fumbled for the camping lantern, dressed quickly in the cold, and drove to town on fumes and hope. The diner's fluorescent lights felt harsh after days of dim illumination, and the warmth inside made her realize just how cold she'd become living underground. Rosa set her to work immediately, bussing tables, pouring coffee, taking orders from the early morning crowd of construction workers and truckers. The work was fast-paced, but not complicated, and Sarah threw herself into it with desperate focus. She couldn't afford to fail. Not now. By the time her shift ended at 1, her feet ached and her back screamed, but she had $63 in tips and a container of leftover pancakes and eggs that Rosa packed for her without being asked. "You did good today," Rosa said as Sarah prepared to leave. "Same time Monday?" "I'll be here," Sarah promised. She drove back to the shelter with the tips carefully folded in her wallet, already calculating how to spend them. Food first. Water. Then tools. She needed to be smart, strategic. Every dollar had to count. Maya was exactly where Sarah had left her, curled up with her stuffed animals, though she'd clearly been crying. She ran to Sarah the moment the door opened, wrapping small arms around her waist. "I thought you weren't coming back," Maya whispered. Sarah's heart broke. "I will always come back, baby. Always. I was just working, making money so we can get things we need." She showed Maya the leftover food, and they ate together while Sarah explained what the diner was like, exaggerating the funny parts and downplaying the hard ones. Maya listened with wide eyes, gradually relaxing. "Can I come next time?" she asked. "On Saturday," Sarah promised. "Rosa said you can come on weekends as long as you're quiet." The rest of the week fell into a rhythm. Wake at 4:15, drive to town, work until 1, return to the shelter, care for Maya, sleep, repeat. By Friday, Sarah had accumulated nearly $200 in tips, more money than she'd held at once in months. Saturday morning, she brought Maya to the diner as promised. Rosa set the child up at a corner table with coloring books and crayons from the supply closet, checking on her periodically while Sarah worked. Maya was silent and well-behaved, and several customers left extra tips, commenting on the sweet little girl. When the shift ended, Rosa handed Sarah an envelope. Inside was her first paycheck, minus taxes, $173. Sarah stared at it, overwhelmed. "You earned it," Rosa said simply. That afternoon, while Maya napped in the car, Sarah visited the hardware store. She bought a cold chisel, a hand sledge, work gloves, safety glasses, and a better flashlight. The total came to $47. She added a small space heater for $32, knowing the cold would only get worse as winter approached. Back at the shelter, she set up the space heater in the main room, plugging it into an extension cord connected to a small generator she'd borrowed from a church outreach program with the promise to return it in 2 weeks. The generator was loud and consumed fuel quickly, so she could only run it for a few hours each day. But those few hours of heat and light felt like luxury. With Maya playing quietly in her makeshift room, Sarah finally turned her attention to the sealed wall. She put on the work gloves, positioned herself in front of the vertical seam, and raised the cold chisel. Her heart pounded. This was it. The moment everything might change, or might reveal nothing but disappointment. The first strike of the sledge against the chisel sent a ringing sound through the shelter that made Maya look up in alarm. "It's okay," Sarah called. "I'm just working on something. You keep playing." She struck again, harder this time. The chisel bit into the seam, and a small chunk of concrete crumbled away. Encouraged, Sarah continued, working methodically along the seam, chipping away the gray concrete that sealed the hidden section. After 20 minutes, her arms burned, and sweat dripped into her eyes despite the cold. But she'd created a narrow groove along the vertical seam, exposing the edge where new concrete met old. She switched to the horizontal seam at floor level, working more carefully now. If she could create a gap large enough to peer through, she could see what lay beyond, before committing to removing the entire section. Another 20 minutes of work. The groove deepened. Then suddenly, the chisel punched through into empty space beyond, and Sarah felt the resistance disappear. Her breath caught. There was something behind the wall. A void. A room. Something. She enlarged the opening carefully, creating a hole about 2 inches wide. Then she grabbed the new flashlight, knelt on the cold concrete, and shone the beam through the gap. At first, she saw only darkness. Then the light caught something. Metal. Shelving. And on those shelves, Sarah's vision narrowed. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She blinked, unconvinced she was seeing things. But when she looked again, the image remained. Stacks of something. Dozens of stacks, organized in neat rows. The light glinted off plastic wrapping, off metallic surfaces beneath the plastic. Her hands trembled as she pulled back from the hole. She took several deep breaths, trying to calm herself, trying to think rationally. She didn't know what she was looking at. It could be anything. Old supplies, military equipment, nothing of value. But the way it was stored, the care taken to preserve it, the fact that it had been sealed away rather than removed. "Aunt Sarah." Maya appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "What are you doing?" Sarah turned, and something in her expression must have shown because Maya stopped, suddenly uncertain. "I think," Sarah said slowly, her voice shaking, "I think I found something. Something someone hid a long time ago." Maya came closer, peering at the hole. "What is it?" "I don't know yet," Sarah admitted. "But tomorrow, we're going to find out." That night, Sarah barely slept. She lay on her blankets, staring at the ceiling, her mind cycling through possibilities. By morning, she'd convinced herself to be cautious, to expect nothing. Whatever was behind that wall had been there for decades. The chances it was anything valuable were infinitesimal, but she couldn't stop thinking about the care with which it had been sealed. The level 1 marking, the hidden seam. Someone had gone to great lengths to conceal it. Why? The question pulled her from her blankets at dawn. She made oatmeal for Maya using the camping stove, and her hands moving automatically while her thoughts remained fixed on the wall. After breakfast, she returned to it with renewed determination. This time, she worked faster, less carefully. She needed to know. The uncertainty was eating at her alive. She chipped away at the horizontal seam, creating an opening large enough to fit her hand through. Then she began on the vertical seam again, widening the groove. An hour passed. Then 2. Maya brought her water and sat watching, sensing that something important was happening. Finally, Sarah had created an opening roughly 18 inches tall and a foot wide. Not large enough to crawl through, but large enough to see clearly inside. She positioned the flashlight and shone it through the gap. The beam illuminated a small room, perhaps 8 feet square, with concrete walls identical to the rest of the shelter. But unlike the empty main spaces, this room was filled. Metal shelving lined 3 walls, floor to ceiling, and on those shelves, stacked in careful rows, were boxes. Lots of boxes. Some were military issue, marked with stenciled numbers. Others were industrial containers, metal cases with latches and hinges. But what made Sarah's breath stop entirely was what lay on the top shelf of the nearest unit. Bars. Metal bars. Wrapped in plastic that had yellowed with age, but remained intact. Even through decades of dust and the warping effect of the flashlight beam, Sarah could see the dull gleam of the metal beneath the plastic. She knew that color. She'd seen it in jewelry stores and movies, in her dreams when she used to allow herself to dream. Gold. Those were gold bars. Her vision swam. She grabbed the edge of the hole to steady herself, her entire body trembling. "Aunt Sarah," Maya's voice came from very far away. "Are you okay?" Sarah couldn't answer. She was too busy counting, too busy trying to comprehend what she was seeing. She shifted the flashlight beam, illuminating more of the shelves, more boxes, more containers. And beneath the plastic on several of them, she could make out different colors. Green, white. The distinctive look of bundled currency. Money. Not just gold bars, but actual cash. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped the flashlight. She forced herself to breathe, to think, to not let hope run wild before she knew for certain. But even as she tried to remain rational, the truth was already sinking in with the weight of revelation. She hadn't just bought a Cold War shelter for $1. She'd bought a fortune someone had hidden decades ago and never returned to claim. Sarah pulled back from the opening, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. She sat on the cold concrete floor, pressing her palms against her face, trying to process what she'd just seen. Gold bars, stacks of currency, all of it sealed away in a hidden room beneath the earth, waiting for decades to be discovered. "Aunt Sarah, you're scaring me," Maya said, her voice small and worried. Sarah lowered her hands and looked at the child. Maya stood several feet away, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide with concern. Sarah realized she must look terrifying, covered in concrete dust, trembling, her expression wild with shock and disbelief. "I'm okay, baby," she managed, though her voice shook. "I'm just surprised. I found something unexpected. Something good, I think." "Can I see?" Maya asked. Sarah hesitated. How did you explain to a 7-year-old that the world might have just changed completely? That the shelter they'd been living in for barely a week, eating donated food and rationing water might contain enough wealth to solve every problem they'd ever faced? Not yet, Sarah said gently. I need to understand what it is first. But I promise, when I know for sure, I'll tell you everything. She stood on unsteady legs and approached the opening again, forcing herself to look calmly, systematically, trying to catalog what she saw rather than letting emotion overwhelm her. The flashlight beam moved across the shelves methodically. She counted the visible gold bars, a 12 on the top shelf of the first unit. More on the shelf below, partially obscured by boxes. The bars were standard size, roughly the dimensions of a brick, each wrapped in protective plastic that had yellowed, but not deteriorated. Below the gold, metal cases, the kind used for transporting valuable cargo. They bore no markings, no labels, just smooth gray surfaces with heavy-duty latches. The shelves on the adjacent wall held something different. Wooden crates, old but intact, with military stenciling on their sides. The letters were faded, but Sarah could make out fragments. U.S. property on one, a serial number on another. These weren't civilian containers. They were government issue. And stacked on the floor in front of the shelves, wrapped in heavy plastic sheeting, were bundles. Lots of bundles. The kind that could only be one thing. Sarah's hands trembled as she shifted the light again, trying to see deeper into the room. The space was more crowded than she'd initially realized. Every available surface held something. This wasn't a casual hiding place. This was systematic storage. Someone had spent considerable time moving all of this down here and organizing it with military precision. The question that kept circling her mind was simple and terrifying. How much was she looking at? She had no experience with precious metals or large amounts of cash. She didn't know current gold prices or how to estimate the value of vintage currency. But even her untrained eye could recognize that what lay behind this wall represented more money than she'd ever imagined possessing. Enough to change everything. Said enough to give Maya a real home. Enough to never worry about food or shelter or medical bills again. If it was real, if it was legal, if she could claim it without losing everything. The thought sobered her instantly. Sarah sat back again, the practical side of her brain reasserting itself over the shock. She couldn't just assume this belonged to her. The shelter did. Yes, she'd purchased it legally. But the contents? That was different. If this was stolen property, if it belonged to the government, or had been hidden by criminals, claiming it could bring consequences she wasn't prepared for. She could lose the shelter, lose custody of Maya, face criminal charges if someone decided she'd known about it before purchasing. She needed help, professional help, but she needed to be smart about it. And Sarah spent the next hour carefully measuring the opening she'd created, then using the camera on her phone to take dozens of photographs through the gap. She documented everything she could see: the shelves, the boxes, the wrapped bars, the bundles on the floor. She took close-ups and wide shots, trying to create a comprehensive record. When her phone battery dropped to 20%, she stopped. She had enough documentation to show someone, to prove what she'd found without removing anything from the room. That felt important. Whatever legal questions surrounded this discovery, she wanted to be able to demonstrate she hadn't disturbed it, hadn't tried to hide it, had done everything properly. But who did she show the photos to? The police seemed like the obvious choice, but something held her back. A police involvement meant investigations, bureaucracy, the slow grinding of official processes. And if the contents were eventually ruled to be hers, how long would that take? Weeks? Months? Years? She and Maya couldn't wait years. They needed help now. An attorney, then. Someone who specialized in property law, or found items, or whatever legal category this fell under. But attorneys cost money she didn't have, and most wouldn't take a case on contingency unless they were certain of a payout. Sarah closed her eyes, forcing herself to think clearly. She'd been poor her entire adult life, surviving on the margins, making do with almost nothing. That experience had taught her resourcefulness, but it hadn't prepared her for this. She was out of her depth in ways she could barely comprehend. The solution came to her slowly, not as a revelation, but as a memory. 6 years ago, before everything fell apart, she'd worked briefly at a hotel in the city. One of the regular guests had been a man named David Chen, a private wealth advisor who'd always been kind to the staff, tipping well, and treating everyone with respect. Sarah had served him breakfast dozens of times, and they'd developed the sort of casual acquaintance that exists between service workers and regulars. She'd heard he'd later opened his own firm, something boutique and discreet, catering to people who'd come into unexpected wealth. Lottery winners, inheritance recipients, people who needed help navigating sudden financial complexity. If she could find him, if he remembered her, if he was willing to help, maybe he could guide her through this without it spiraling into legal chaos. No, it was a long shot, but it was better than going to the police or trying to figure this out alone. That evening, after Maya fell asleep, Sarah sat in the main room with her phone connected to the portable charger, searching for David Chen. She found his firm's website easily enough, Chen Wealth Management, located in the city she'd left months ago. The site was professional, but understated, emphasizing discretion and personalized service. She stared at the contact form for a long time before finally typing a message. "Mr. Chen, you probably don't remember me, but I worked at the Grandview Hotel about 6 years ago. You were a regular guest, and you were always kind. I'm reaching out because I found myself in an unusual situation, and I need professional advice. I've discovered something valuable in a property I purchased, and I don't know who to trust with the information. If you're willing to speak with me, I would be grateful for any guidance you can offer. Sarah Mitchell." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, then sat in the quiet of the shelter, listening to Maya's soft breathing from the next room and wondering if she'd just made a terrible mistake. The response came at 7 the next morning, waking Sarah from restless sleep. Her phone buzzed with an email notification. "Sarah, I do remember you. I hope you and your family are well. I'd be happy to speak with you about your situation. My next available appointment is this afternoon at 2. If that works, please reply, and I'll send you the address. Best regards, David." Sarah read the message 3 times, hardly believing her luck. She typed a quick confirmation, and then spent the next several hours in a state of anxious preparation. She needed to present this professionally, to demonstrate she wasn't just some desperate woman chasing a fantasy. The photos would help, but she needed to organize her thoughts, to explain the situation clearly and rationally. By 1 o'clock, she'd left Maya with Rosa at the diner. The older woman had agreed immediately when Sarah explained she had an important appointment, and was driving toward the city, her phone with its damning photographs tucked safely in her pocket. David Chen's office was in a restored brownstone on a quiet street lined with trees. The sign beside the door was small and tasteful, just his name and the words, "Wealth Management." Sarah climbed the steps with her heart pounding, on feeling acutely aware of her worn clothes and the lingering scent of concrete dust that seemed to have become part of her skin. The interior was warm and professionally appointed, without being ostentatious. A receptionist greeted her with a genuine smile and showed her to a comfortable waiting area. 10 minutes later, a door opened, and David Chen emerged. He looked older than Sarah remembered, his hair graying at the temples, but his expression was as kind as it had been years ago. He extended a hand. "Sarah, it's good to see you again." His office was lined with bookshelves and featured a large wooden desk, positioned to take advantage of the natural light from tall windows. He gestured for her to sit, then took the chair across from her rather than retreating behind the desk. The gesture felt deliberate, meant to put her at ease. Thank you for seeing me," Sarah began, her voice steadier than she felt. "I know this must seem strange." "Not at all," David said. "Your email suggested you've come into something unexpected. That's actually my specialty." Sarah nodded, gathering her courage. "About 2 weeks ago, I bought a property at a county auction, a Cold War-era fallout shelter. I paid $1 for it." David's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't interrupt. "The shelter was sealed when I bought it. No one had been inside for decades. I needed a place to live, so I started fixing it up. While I was working, I found a hidden room. Someone had sealed off part of the structure years ago, concealed it behind concrete." She pulled out her phone and opened the photo gallery. "Yesterday, I broke through the seal. This is what I found." She handed him the phone. David took it and began scrolling through the images, his expression growing increasingly serious. He zoomed in on several photos, studying details, then looked up at her. "You haven't removed anything from the room?" "No. I took these pictures and sealed the opening back up with plastic sheeting. I haven't told anyone else about this. I needed to understand the legal situation before I did anything." David nodded slowly. "That was very smart. May I ask, what made you come to me instead of going to the police?" Sarah met his eyes. "I'm living in that shelter with my 7-year-old niece. Her parents died 3 months ago, and I'm her guardian. We were homeless before I bought the property. If this belongs to someone else, if there's a legal battle, I can't afford to lose the shelter while it gets sorted out. I need someone who can help me navigate this intelligently." Something in David's expression softened. "Tell me about the purchase. How did you come to buy this property?" Sarah explained everything. The auction, the single bid, the county paperwork releasing them from all liability. She showed him the receipt, the deed transfer, the liability waiver she'd signed. David studied the documents carefully. "The purchase appears completely legitimate. You bought the property and everything on it, as is, with no representations made about its contents. That's important." "Does that mean I own what's inside?" Sarah asked, hardly daring to hope. "Potentially, yes. The legal doctrine is called treasure trove, or found property, depending on the jurisdiction. Generally speaking, if you purchase property and discover something hidden on or in it, you have a strong claim to ownership. But there are exceptions." "What exceptions?" "If the property was stolen, the original owner could claim it. If it's government property that was hidden illegally, the government could seize it. If someone can prove they have a superior claim, they could challenge your ownership. The key is establishing the chain of custody and proving that no one else has a legitimate claim." Sarah felt her brief hope deflate. "So I might not be able to keep it." "I'm not saying that. I'm saying we need to be thorough. The fact that this was in a Cold War shelter is actually helpful. Those structures were often used to store emergency supplies, currency reserves, precious metals, things the government wanted, kept safe in case of nuclear war. It's entirely possible that what you found was legally stored there and then forgotten when the shelter was decommissioned." "How do we find out?" David leaned back in his chair, thinking. "We need to do several things. First, document everything more thoroughly. I'll arrange for a professional appraiser to examine the contents and create an official inventory. Second, we research the shelter's history. Who built it? Who had access? What it was used for? Third, we consult with an attorney who specializes in found property law. And fourth, we keep this quiet until we understand what we're dealing with." "How long will all that take?" "For the initial assessment and research, maybe 2 to 3 weeks. Longer if we encounter complications." He paused. "Sarah, I need to ask, and please be honest. Do you have any reason to believe this might be stolen property? anything about the shelter's location or history that suggests criminal activity. Sarah shook her head. The county owned it for over 30 years. It was part of an old military reserve. The records say it was decommissioned in the early 90s and transferred to local government. I don't know anything beyond that. Good. That's a legitimate provenance. David stood and moved to his desk, pulling out a contract. I'd like to work with you on this if you're willing. My fee structure is different for found asset cases. Instead of charging by the hour, I take a percentage of the final recovery. 15% if we establish clear ownership, nothing if we don't. 15% of something was infinitely better than 100% of nothing. Sarah agreed immediately. They spent the next hour going over details, signing agreements, discussing next steps. David made several phone calls while Sarah waited, arranging for an appraiser to visit the shelter the following day. When they finally finished, Sarah felt simultaneously relieved and terrified. She'd set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. As she stood to leave, David asked one more question. Sarah, I know you're in a difficult situation. If this turns out to be legitimate, if you're able to claim ownership, are you prepared for how your life might change? She thought about Maya sleeping in a cold concrete room, about the car they'd lived in, about every moment of fear and humiliation over the past months. I think I can handle it. I hope so. But be aware, sudden wealth brings its own complications. People will treat you differently. Family members you haven't heard from will suddenly need help. You'll have to make decisions about money that most people never face. It can be overwhelming. Sarah appreciated the warning, though it seemed impossibly distant from her current reality. Right now, she still had less than $100 to her name and a niece waiting at a diner. The problems of wealth seemed like luxuries she'd happily accept. The appraiser arrived at the shelter the next morning at 9, a compact woman in her 50s named Dr. Elizabeth Marlowe, who specialized in precious metals and historical currency. David accompanied her, along with a photographer and a legal notary to document the process. Sarah had spent the previous evening enlarging the opening in the wall, or creating a gap large enough for a person to climb through. When Dr. Marlowe saw it, she let out a low whistle. "This is extraordinary," she murmured, shining a high-powered light into the hidden room. "The preservation is remarkable." She spent several minutes examining the room from outside before climbing through. Sarah watched from the opening as the appraiser moved carefully between the shelves, taking photographs, making notes, occasionally handling items with gloved hands. After 20 minutes, Dr. Marlowe emerged, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes bright with excitement. "I'll need to do a full inventory and testing, but from preliminary examination, you're looking at significant value. The gold bars alone, if they're genuine, represent substantial worth. And some of the currency appears to be vintage, which could increase its value beyond face amount." "How substantial?" Sarah asked, though part of her was afraid to hear the answer. "I can't give you an exact figure until I've authenticated everything and checked current market rates. But conservatively, based on what I'm seeing, you're looking at something in the range of several $1,000,000, possibly much more." Several $1,000,000. The words didn't seem real. Sarah felt the world tilt slightly, and David's hand steadied her elbow. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," he said calmly. "We need authentication first." Dr. Marlowe nodded. "I'll need to remove some items for testing. With your permission, I'd like to take 1 gold bar and several currency samples to my lab. I'll provide receipts and return them within a week." Sarah agreed, watching in a daze as the appraiser carefully extracted items from the hidden room, documenting each one with photographs and detailed notes. The photographer captured everything from multiple angles, while the notary recorded the process officially. By noon, they'd completed the initial assessment. Dr. Marlowe had taken samples. The photographer had shot hundreds of images, and the notary had witnessed and documented the entire procedure. After they left, Sarah sat alone in the shelter's main room, trying to comprehend what was happening. Several $1 million. Maybe more. It was an abstract figure, too large to feel real. Maya returned from the diner in the afternoon, brought by Rosa, who'd grown fond of the child. The older woman stayed only briefly, but Sarah saw the question in her eyes. The curiosity about why Sarah's situation suddenly involved professional visitors and official procedures. Just some legal stuff about the property, Sarah explained vaguely. Rosa accepted this with a knowing look that suggested she suspected more, but wouldn't pry. That night, Sarah lay awake again, but for different reasons than before. For months, she'd been in survival mode. Every thought focused on immediate needs: food, shelter, safety. But now, for the first time, she had to think beyond survival. What would she do with several $1 million? The question felt so foreign it was almost laughable. But it demanded consideration. Pay off debts, obviously, though she had few. Get proper housing for her and Maya. Buy a car that actually ran reliably. Save for Maya's future. But beyond that, she had no framework for thinking about wealth, no experience managing anything beyond paycheck-to-paycheck existence. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. The week that followed moved with agonizing slowness. Sarah continued working at the diner, maintaining the appearance of normalcy, even as her thoughts churned constantly. She told no one about the discovery, deflecting Rosa's gentle questions and avoiding calls from her family. David contacted her daily with updates. The research into the shelter's history was progressing. He'd found records indicating it had been built in 1962 as part of a classified government program, then decommissioned in 1991. Ownership had transferred to the county the following year, when the federal government stopped maintaining Cold War infrastructure. Here's what's interesting, David explained during one call. The decommissioning records are incomplete. There's a note that all government property was to be removed before transfer, but there's no inventory list showing what was taken out. It's possible someone was supposed to empty the shelter and failed to discover the hidden room. So it might have been legally abandoned? Sarah asked. That's my working theory. If the government failed to claim it during decommissioning, and the county acquired it without knowledge of the contents, you could have a very strong ownership claim. The appraiser called 6 days after taking her samples. Sarah was at work when the phone rang, and she stepped outside to take it, her heart pounding. The gold bars are genuine, Dr. Marlowe said without preamble. 24 karat, on standard issue U.S. Treasury bars from the early 1960s. And the currency is extraordinary. Most of it is vintage bills from the same era, but some date back to the 1920s and 30s. For collectors, that significantly increases the value beyond face amount. Sarah leaned against the diner's brick wall, her legs suddenly weak. How significantly? I've completed a preliminary inventory based on the photographs and my initial examination. Obviously, I need to assess every item individually for a final figure. But here's what I can tell you now. Sarah heard papers rustling. You have approximately 320 gold bars, each weighing 1 kilogram. At current market rates, that's roughly $20 million. The currency, both vintage and standard issue, totals approximately $200 million in face value. But factoring in collector value for the older bills and the pristine condition of the storage, you're looking at substantially more. Sarah couldn't breathe. The numbers were too large, too impossible. Dr. Marlowe continued. There are also the metal cases. I wasn't able to open them without proper tools, but based on their weight and construction, they likely contain additional precious metals or gemstones. And the military crates appear to hold strategic supply items, some of which have historical value. What's the total? Sarah managed to ask. Conservative estimate, accounting only for items I've directly assessed and using current market minimums, you're looking at $301 million. $301 million. Sarah slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold pavement, a phone pressed to her ear, unable to process what she was hearing. "Ms. Mitchell? Are you still there?" "Yes," Sarah whispered. "I'm here. I don't understand. That's not possible." "I assure you it's very possible. This appears to be a Cold War emergency cache, probably one of several the government established in case of catastrophic attack. For various reasons, bureaucratic confusion, administrative oversight, this particular cache was never retrieved. And now, through a remarkable chain of circumstances, it belongs to you." After the call ended, Sarah sat on the pavement for a long time, staring at nothing. $301 million, hidden in a shelter she'd bought for $1, waiting beneath the earth while she'd slept in her car, rationed food, and fought to survive. The universe had a strange sense of irony. She called David immediately. He listened to the appraiser's findings in silence, then let out a long breath. "This changes things," he said. "With that much money involved, we need to move very carefully. I'm going to bring in a specialized attorney, someone who's handled major found asset cases. We'll need to establish clear ownership before word gets out, because once it does, people will come out of the woodwork claiming they have rights to it. How long will that take? Maybe a month, maybe 3, possibly longer if the government decides to challenge. But Sarah, understand something. Even if this takes a year, even if you end up in court, you're in an extraordinarily strong position. You purchased the property legally. The cash was undocumented and abandoned. The county had 30 years to discover it, and didn't. Unless someone can prove this was stolen property, which seems unlikely given the government provenance, you will almost certainly be able to claim ownership." "And then what?" Sarah asked, still struggling to grasp the reality. "Then you become a very wealthy woman, and your life changes forever." That night, Sarah did something she hadn't allowed herself to do in months. She cried, not from despair or exhaustion or fear, but from overwhelming relief. She cried for every night spent in the car, for every dollar she'd agonized over spending, for every moment she'd felt like a failure. She cried because Maya would have everything she needed: college funds, medical care, a real home with her own room and toys and stability. She cried because they would never be hungry again, never be cold, never lie awake wondering how they'd survive the next week. When the tears finally stopped, she felt emptied out but oddly peaceful. The journey wasn't over. Legal battles likely awaited. Complications would arise. But for the first time since her sister died, Sarah could see a path forward that didn't involve struggle and sacrifice and constant fear. She'd been given a gift, hidden in concrete and darkness, waiting for someone desperate enough to claim it. And she'd found it not through luck, but through the same stubborn determination that had kept her fighting when everything said to give up. In the morning, she woke Maya gently and made her oatmeal on the camping stove. The child ate quietly, sensing something different in the air. "Aunt Sarah, are we going to be okay?" Maya asked, her voice small. Sarah knelt down and pulled her close, holding her tight. "Yeah, baby, we're going to be better than okay. I can't explain everything yet, but I found something in the shelter, something valuable, and it's going to help us build a real life." "Like a house with a yard?" Maya asked hopefully. "Like a house with a yard," Sarah confirmed, "and your own room with a real bed, and anything else you want." Maya's eyes widened. "Can I have a puppy?" Sarah laughed, the sound surprising her with its lightness. "Yeah, sweetheart, you can have a puppy." She held Maya for a long time, feeling the child's heartbeat against hers, and silently thanked the unknown person who'd hidden that fortune decades ago. Thanked them for being too careful, for concealing it too well, for leaving it behind when they never returned. Their loss had become her salvation, and she would honor it by giving Maya the childhood she deserved, by breaking the cycle of poverty and fear that had defined Sarah's own life. The shelter that had been their last desperate refuge had become the foundation of their future. And Sarah Mitchell, who'd spent weeks convinced she'd failed at everything that mattered, allowed herself to finally believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be all right. The attorney David brought in was a woman named Patricia Vance, a specialist in property law with experience in several high-profile found asset cases. She arrived at David's office with a thick briefcase and an air of professional competence that immediately put Sarah at ease. "I've reviewed the documentation David provided," Patricia said after introductions. "Your case is fascinating from a legal perspective. The key factors working in your favor are the legitimate purchase, the county's decades-long ownership without discovery, and the apparent abandonment by federal authorities." She spread several documents across the conference table. "Here's what I propose. We file a declaratory judgment action, essentially asking the court to confirm your ownership rights. This is proactive rather than reactive. We control the narrative and the timing. It also demonstrates good faith, that you're not trying to hide anything." "Won't that alert people who might want to challenge it?" Sarah asked. "Possibly. But they'll find out eventually. And it's better to address challenges in a controlled legal environment than to have claims pop up randomly after you've already spent or distributed the money. This way, we resolve everything up front." Sarah listened as Patricia outlined the legal strategy. They would need to formally notify the federal government, giving them an opportunity to claim the cash if they could prove it was stolen or illegally hidden. They would also need to notify the county, though Patricia was confident the county would disclaim any interest given their own records showed complete transfer of the property. "What's the timeline?" Sarah asked. "We'll file within the week. The government has 90 days to respond. If they don't challenge, or if they acknowledge they have no claim, we move to final judgment. Best case scenario, you have clear title within 4 to 6 months. Worst case, if there's a challenge, we're looking at a year or more of litigation. And if we win?" Patricia smiled. "When you win, the full value becomes legally yours. At that point, David and I will help you establish proper financial structures, trusts for Maya's future, investment accounts, tax planning. With this much money, you'll need a team of professionals managing different aspects." The meeting lasted 2 hours. By the end, Sarah's head spun with legal terminology and procedural details, but the core message was clear. She had a legitimate claim, strong legal backing, and a realistic path to ownership. She left the office with a strange sense of surrealism. In a parallel universe, she was still living in her car, still struggling to feed Maya, still drowning. But in this universe, she was potentially months away from generational wealth. The duality was disorienting. Work at the diner continued as her anchor to reality. Rosa never asked directly about what was happening, but Sarah sensed the older woman knew something significant was unfolding. The kindness Rosa showed intensified. Little gestures like extra food packed for Maya or gentle inquiries about whether Sarah needed time off. "I'm okay," Sarah assured her repeatedly. "Better than okay, actually." "Good," Rosa said simply. "You deserve good things, Mija. Both of you do." The legal filing happened on a Tuesday. Patricia called to confirm the paperwork had been submitted, and now they waited for responses. Sarah felt oddly calm. The wheels were in motion, and there was nothing to do but let the process unfold. She spent her evenings in the shelter with Maya, and for the first time, allowed herself to plan for a future beyond mere survival. She bought a notebook and began writing lists. Though things Maya needed, things they both needed. Not extravagant items, just normal things that poverty had made impossible. Clothes that fit, dental checkups, books. "What are you writing?" Maya asked one evening, peering over her shoulder. "Plans," Sarah said. "Ideas for what we'll do when things are more settled." "Can we go to the zoo?" Maya asked hopefully. Sarah added it to the list, smiling. "Absolutely." 3 weeks after the filing, David called with news. The county responded. They formally disclaimed any interest in the cash, confirming they had no knowledge of it and make no ownership claim. That's good, right? Very good. One less potential challenger. Now we wait for the federal government. The federal response came 6 weeks later, delivered in a thick envelope that Patricia hand-carried to Sarah at the diner. Rosa let them use the back office, closing the door to give them privacy. Patricia pulled out the official document, her expression carefully neutral. "The Department of Treasury has responded to our filing." Sarah's heart sank. Challenge. They were going to challenge it. But Patricia was smiling. They acknowledge the cash was part of a classified Cold War program. They confirm it was administratively abandoned during the 1991 decommissioning process, and they state they have no present claim to the assets, as they were written off as lost over 30 years ago. Sarah stared at her. They're not fighting it? They're not fighting it. Apparently, the bureaucratic hassle of trying to reclaim long-abandoned assets, combined with the legitimate transfer of property and your good faith purchase, makes it not worth pursuing. Oh, they're washing their hands of it. "So I own it." Patricia's smile widened. "Pending final judicial confirmation, which is now a formality, yes. You own $301 million worth of Cold War treasure." Sarah sat down heavily, her legs giving out. It was real. Actually real. "There's more," Patricia continued, "because this was government property that was officially abandoned. You won't owe taxes on it. Found property is normally taxable as income, but there's an exception for government assets that were written off. The IRS has already provided a determination letter confirming tax-exempt status." "I don't have to pay taxes on $300 million? Sarah asked incredulously. "Correct. You'll pay taxes on any income the money generates through investments, but the principal itself is tax-free." Sarah covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed. When she lowered them, Patricia was watching her with warm understanding. "I know this is a lot to process. Take your time. The final judgment will be entered in about 30 days, and then the money is officially yours to access. David and I will help you set up accounts, establish trusts, create a financial plan. You won't be navigating this alone." That evening, Sarah sat Maya down in the shelter and explained, as simply as she could, what was happening. "Remember how I said I found something valuable in the shelter? Something that would help us?" Maya nodded, her eyes wide and serious. "It's very valuable. Enough money that we'll never have to worry again. Enough to buy a house and a car and anything we need. Enough to make sure you go to college and have a good life." "How much money?" Maya asked. Sarah took a breath. $300 million. Maya blinked, the number clearly meaningless to her. "Is that a lot?" Sarah laughed, the sound edged with hysteria. "Yeah, baby, it's a lot. Can I still have a puppy?" "You can have 10 puppies if you want." Maya considered this seriously. "I think just one is good, but maybe a big one." Sarah pulled her close, this child who'd lost everything and asked for so little. "A big one it is." The 30 days until final judgment passed in a blur of activity. David helped Sarah open bank accounts, set up trusts for Maya's education and future, and begin planning investment strategies. Patricia ensured all legal paperwork was properly filed and organized. Sarah gave notice at the diner. though Rosa insisted she didn't need to work out the full 2 weeks. "You've been good to me," Sarah said. "Let me be good back." On her last day, Rosa pulled her aside. "Whatever happened, whatever you found, I'm glad. You and Maya deserve every bit of happiness that comes your way." Sarah hugged her, this woman who'd shown kindness when kindness was rare. "Thank you for seeing us when everyone else looked away. De nada, mija. Now go build that good life." The day the final judgment was entered, Sarah was in the shelter with Maya when David called. "It's official," he said simply. "The court has confirmed your ownership. The money is yours." Sarah ended the call and looked around the cold concrete space that had been their refuge. The camping lantern still burned in the corner. The emergency blankets still covered the chairs. But soon, they wouldn't need any of it. "Maya, sweetie," she called. "Come here." The child appeared from her room, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Yeah? How would you like to go look at houses tomorrow? Real houses. Pick out which one you want to be ours." Maya's face lit up with the first genuine, unrestrained joy Sarah had seen since her parents died. "Really? Really?" That night, Sarah walked out of the shelter and stood under the stars, breathing in the cold air and marveling at how completely life could change. 2 months ago, she'd been homeless and hopeless. Now, she was wealthier than she'd ever imagined possible. But more than the money, more than the security it represented, what filled her with gratitude was the knowledge that Maya would be okay, would have opportunities, would grow up safe and loved and free from the poverty that had constrained Sarah's own childhood. The shelter had saved them twice. First, by providing refuge when they had nowhere else to go, and second, by holding a fortune that transformed everything. Sarah looked back at the concrete entrance, barely visible in the darkness, and silently thanked it. Thanked the unknown government officials who'd hidden supplies they thought might save lives after nuclear war. Thanked the bureaucrats who'd forgotten to remove them. Thanked the county officials who'd sold her the property without knowing what it contained. And she thanked herself for being stubborn enough to survive, desperate enough to bid on an abandoned hole in the ground, and determined enough to break through that sealed wall. She'd earned this, not through luck, but through sheer refusal to give up. Tomorrow, they would start looking for a house. Next week, she'd enroll Maya in a good school. The month after, they'd begin building the life Sarah had always dreamed of, but never thought possible. But tonight, she stood under the stars and let herself feel the full weight of what had happened. The transformation, the vindication, the proof that sometimes, when you're at your absolute lowest, when you've lost everything and everyone doubts you, the universe conspires to reward your perseverance in ways you never imagined. Sarah Mitchell had bet everything on a $1 shelter, and she'd won more than money. She'd won hope. The house hunting began on a Saturday morning with crisp autumn air and the kind of blue sky that seemed to promise good things. Sarah had chosen a realtor recommended by David, a woman named Karen Stevens, who specialized in high-end properties and, more importantly, understood discretion. "I have a specific budget in mind," Sarah had told her over the phone, still unused to saying the words. "Something comfortable, but not ostentatious. Good schools, safe neighborhood, room for a child to play." Karen had arrived at their meeting in a sensible sedan, dressed professionally but not expensively, and greeted Maya with genuine warmth rather than the patronizing tone some adults used with children. Sarah appreciated that immediately. They started with a modest 4-bedroom colonial in a neighborhood Sarah recognized from her previous life, when she'd driven through places like this on her way to cleaning jobs, wondering what it felt like to live behind those neat facades. The house was beautiful, well-maintained, with a backyard that would be perfect for the puppy Maya dreamed of. "What do you think?" Sarah asked Maya as they walked through the empty rooms. Maya ran her hand along the wall of what would be her bedroom, eyes wide with wonder. It's so big. It was big. Maybe 12 by 14, with windows overlooking the backyard and a closet larger than the concrete room she'd been sleeping in. Sarah felt emotion rise in her throat watching Maya's reaction. "We can paint it any color you want," Sarah said. "Pick out furniture. Make it exactly how you like it." They saw 3 more houses that day, each impressive in its own way. But Sarah noticed Maya kept comparing them to the first one, or the colonial, with the big backyard and the bedroom that got morning sunlight. "I think we found it," Sarah told Karen, as they stood on the front lawn of the colonial for the second time that afternoon. "Are you sure?" Karen, her mother answered on the 3rd ring, voice wary. "Sarah, I was beginning to think you'd cut us off completely." "Hi, Mom. I'm sorry I haven't called. Things have been complicated. Where are you living? Daniel said you haven't been answering his calls either. We've been worried." Sarah took a breath. "I'm living in a property I purchased, a Cold War shelter. Maya and I have been making it work." Silence on the other end, then a heavy sigh. "Sarah, this is exactly what I was afraid of. You can't raise a child in some underground bunker. It's not safe. It's not appropriate. You need to seriously consider—" "Mom," Sarah interrupted gently, "I need to tell you something. While I was fixing up the shelter, I found something. Something valuable. Very valuable." Another pause. "What do you mean, valuable?" "I mean, I found a hidden cache of gold and currency from the Cold War era. The government had abandoned it. I now legally own it. It's worth $301 million. The silence stretched so long Sarah thought the call had dropped. Then her mother's voice came back, smaller, uncertain. "Is this some kind of joke?" "It's not a joke. The legal process is complete. The money is mine. I'm closing on a house next week, a real house with a yard and 4 bedrooms. Maya and I are going to be fine. Better than fine." $300 million, her mother repeated, as though testing the words. "That's not possible." "It is possible. It happened. And Mom, I want you to know that I'm not angry about how you reacted before. I understand you were worried, but I need you to understand something too. I did this. I kept Maya safe. I found a way forward when everyone told me to give up, and I was right not to give up." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, her mother cycling through disbelief, shock, and finally a kind of cautious joy mixed with what might have been shame. She apologized, though not as directly as Sarah might have wished, and asked to see them soon. "We'd like that," Sarah said honestly, "once we're settled in the house." The call with her brother Daniel was shorter and more direct. He listened to the news, was silent for a moment, then laughed in a way that sounded almost pained. "You're telling me you bought a bunker for $1 and found $300 million in it?" "That's what I'm telling you." "Jesus, Sarah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't help more. I'm sorry I told you to give up Maya. I was wrong." "Yeah," Sarah said simply. "You were." They talked for a while longer, the conversation easier than she'd expected, and when they hung up, Sarah felt a weight lift that she hadn't fully acknowledged carrying. Her family's judgment had hurt more than she'd admitted, even to herself. Having that judgment reversed, having them acknowledge they'd been wrong about her, felt like a vindication that money alone couldn't provide. But the most satisfying conversation came from an unexpected source. 3 days after the house purchase, Sarah received a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Sarah Mitchell?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes?" "This is Diane Bradley. I'm a caseworker with Child Protective Services. I received a report that you were living with a minor child in unsafe conditions. I need to schedule a home visit." Sarah's blood ran cold. Someone had reported her. Even now, even after everything had changed, someone was trying to take Maya away. "Who filed the report?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice steady. "I can't disclose that information, but I do need to see you and the child. Can we schedule something for this week?" Sarah thought quickly. "Ms. Bradley, the situation has changed significantly since that report was filed. Can I ask when you received it?" "It came in about a month ago. We're backlogged, so I'm just now following up." A month ago, when Sarah was still living in the shelter, still struggling, still vulnerable, and someone had seen fit to report her rather than help. "I understand," Sarah said. "I'd like to invite you to visit us, but not at the current address. We're moving into our permanent home next week. Could we schedule the visit for there?" Diane agreed, and Sarah provided the address of the Colonial. After hanging up, she sat for a moment, fury and hurt warring inside her. She had a suspicion about who'd made the report, based on timing and proximity. But there was nothing to do about it now, except ensure that when the caseworker visited, she saw a child who was safe, cared for, and thriving. The closing on the house happened on a Tuesday afternoon in an attorney's office that smelled of leather and old books. Sarah signed document after document, her new identity as a person of means still feeling like a costume she hadn't quite grown into. When the attorney handed her the keys, she held them for a moment, unfeeling their weight. "Congratulations," he said. "You're a homeowner." Maya was with Rosa during the closing, and Sarah picked her up immediately after, driving straight to the new house. They walked through the empty rooms together, footsteps echoing on hardwood floors, and Sarah watched Maya's face transform with each space they explored. "This is ours?" Maya kept asking. "Really ours? Really ours?" They spent the first night on air mattresses David had arranged to be delivered, lying in the master bedroom with windows open to let in the autumn breeze. Outside, crickets sang and distant traffic hummed. Normal suburban sounds. Safe sounds. "Aunt Sarah?" Maya whispered in the darkness. "Yeah, baby. Are you happy?" Sarah thought about the question. Was she happy? She was relieved, certainly, grateful, overwhelmed, but happy. She reached across the space between air mattresses and found Maya's hand. "Yeah," she said, surprised to find it true. "I think I am." The furniture arrived over the next several days. Sarah had worked with an interior designer David recommended, someone who understood the delicate balance between creating a beautiful home and not making it feel sterile or intimidating. They chose comfortable pieces, durable fabrics that could withstand a child and a future dog, colors that felt warm rather than formal. Maya's room was painted a soft lavender at her request, with white furniture and shelves for books they'd yet to buy. Sarah's room was simpler, decorated in calm blues and grays that felt peaceful after years of chaos. The kitchen was stocked with real groceries, bought without checking prices or calculating to the penny. The refrigerator hummed with abundance. It felt surreal. Every morning, Sarah woke up expecting to find herself back in the car or in the cold shelter, the comfort revealed as nothing more than a dream. But every morning, she opened her eyes to soft sheets and morning light through actual curtains, and the reality remained. The home visit from Child Protective Services happened 1 week after they moved in. Sarah had prepared carefully, ensuring the house looked lived in, but not excessive. She'd briefed Maya on what to expect, emphasizing that they just needed to answer questions honestly. Diane Bradley arrived promptly at 10, a woman in her 40s, with tired eyes and a professional demeanor softened by years of seeing difficult situations. She stepped into the foyer and paused, clearly surprised by what she was seeing. "Why, this is beautiful," she said, and it wasn't quite what Sarah had expected to hear. They sat in the living room while Diane asked standard questions. Where did Maya sleep? What did she eat? Was she enrolled in school? Did she have friends? Sarah answered everything directly, watching the caseworker's confusion grow, as it became clear this situation bore no resemblance to whatever the report had described. When Diane asked to speak with Maya alone, Sarah agreed without hesitation. She waited in the kitchen, listening to the murmur of voices from the other room, and tried not to let anxiety overwhelm her. 20 minutes later, Diane emerged with Maya, her expression thoughtful. "Ms. Mitchell, can we speak privately?" Sarah's heart sank, but she followed Diane into the dining room. The caseworker pulled out a folder and opened it, on showing Sarah the original report. It was dated 5 weeks earlier and described a woman living in a vehicle with a minor child, suspected of being homeless and unable to provide adequate care. "This report was accurate when it was filed," Diane said carefully. "Wasn't it?" Sarah met her eyes. "Yes. 5 weeks ago, Maya and I were sleeping in my car. We were homeless. I had just lost my job and was struggling to find another. The report was accurate. And now? Now, I own this house and have substantial financial resources. I can provide Maya with everything she needs." Diane studied her for a long moment. "How did things change so dramatically?" Sarah explained, briefly, about the shelter purchase and the discovery. She showed Diane the legal documents confirming her ownership, the bank statements David had helped her prepare, the trust funds established for Maya's future. With each piece of evidence, she watched the caseworker's expression shift from skepticism to astonishment. "This is extraordinary," Diane said finally. "I've never seen anything like it." "Does this mean the case is closed?" Sarah asked. "Yes, emphatically yes. Maya is clearly safe, well cared for, and in a stable environment. I'll file a report stating the concerns have been comprehensively addressed." She paused. "Ms. Mitchell, I want you to know that whoever filed that report may have thought they were helping. Sometimes people see a difficult situation, and the only tool they know to use is the system, even when the system isn't necessarily the right answer." Sarah nodded, though the hurt remained. Someone had seen her struggling and chosen to threaten her rather than help. But dwelling on it would poison the new life she was building. After Diane left, Sarah sat on the front porch and allowed herself a moment of pure satisfaction. The last threat had been neutralized. Maya was safe, legally and practically. No one could challenge her custody. No one could claim she was unfit. She'd won. Completely and utterly won. That weekend, they went to the animal shelter. Maya had been asking about the puppy daily, and Sarah had promised that once they were fully settled, they'd find the perfect dog. The shelter was crowded and loud, filled with barking and the smell of animals, and the hopeful faces of dogs pressing against kennel doors. Maya walked slowly down the aisle, studying each one seriously. "How will I know which one is right?" she asked. "You'll know," Sarah assured her. 3 rows in, Maya stopped in front of a kennel holding a medium-sized dog with golden fur and soulful brown eyes. The dog sat quietly, not jumping or barking like the others, just watching them with what looked like patient hope. "This one," Maya said with certainty. The shelter volunteer explained the dog was about 2 years old, a mix of golden retriever and something else, surrendered by a family that had to move. He was gentle, house-trained, and good with children. "His name is Cooper," the volunteer said. Maya looked up at Sarah. "Can we keep the name?" Sarah knelt beside Maya, looking at the dog who watched them both with those hopeful eyes. "Yeah, baby. We can keep the name." The adoption process took an hour, filled with paperwork and instructions and supplies purchased from the shelter's small shop. So when they finally walked out with Cooper on a leash, Maya's smile was brighter than Sarah had seen since before her parents died. That evening, they sat in the backyard while Cooper explored his new territory. The sun set in shades of orange and pink, painting the sky in colors that seemed too vivid to be real. Maya threw a ball for Cooper, laughing when he returned it, and dropped it at her feet. Sarah watched them. This child who'd lost so much, and this dog who'd been given up, both finding happiness in a yard that hadn't existed in their lives weeks ago. The emotion that rose in her throat was complex. Joy and grief and gratitude all tangled together. "You did good, Jules," she whispered to her sister, wherever she was. "She's going to be okay, I promise." The school year had already started, and so Sarah enrolled Maya in the local elementary school's second grade. The principal, a kind woman named Mrs. Anderson, welcomed them warmly and assured Sarah that Maya would catch up on anything she'd missed. On Maya's first day, Sarah walked her to the classroom, carrying the new backpack they'd picked out together. Maya's uniform was crisp, her hair neatly braided, her lunchbox filled with things Sarah had once only dreamed of providing. At the classroom door, Maya hesitated. "What if the other kids don't like me?" Sarah knelt down, straightening Maya's collar. "Then they don't know what they're missing. But I think they're going to love you. Just be yourself, okay?" Maya nodded, took a deep breath, and walked into the classroom. Sarah watched through the door window as the teacher introduced her, as several children waved in greeting, as Maya took her seat with a tentative smile. Walking back to the car, Sarah felt tears threaten. Maya had a normal school, with art class and recess and field trips and all the things children deserved. It was such a simple thing, so utterly ordinary, and it felt like a miracle. The news of Sarah's fortune didn't spread immediately, but it spread inevitably. In a town where most people knew each other at least by sight, where gossip moved through social circles like water finding cracks, secrets rarely lasted long. The first person to approach her directly was a neighbor, a woman named Susan, who lived 2 doors down. Sarah was gardening in the front yard, something she'd discovered she enjoyed, when Susan appeared on the sidewalk. "Sarah, hi, I'm Susan, and I wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood." They chatted for a few minutes about gardening and the weather before Susan got to the real point. "I heard something interesting at the coffee shop yesterday about how you came to buy this house. Is it true you found something valuable?" Sarah leaned back on her heels, studying the woman. Susan's expression was curious, but not unkind. She made a decision. Hiding would only fuel speculation. "It's true. I bought an old Cold War shelter at auction and found a government cache inside. It's changed my life." "I can imagine," Susan said. "That must have been incredible." "It was. It is." Sarah paused. "I'm still getting used to it, honestly. Well, if you ever need anything, or if Maya wants to play with my daughter Emma, just let me know. We're happy to have you here." After Susan left, and Sarah felt oddly lighter, the truth was out, at least partially, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, Susan had seemed genuinely pleased for her. Not everyone was as gracious. Over the following weeks, Sarah encountered the full spectrum of human reaction to sudden wealth. Some people were genuinely happy for her. Others were envious, their smiles tight and forced. A few were openly hostile, as though her good fortune was somehow an insult to their struggles. The worst was an encounter at the grocery store. Sarah was shopping, still marveling at the ability to buy whatever she needed, when she heard a voice behind her. "Well, if it isn't the lottery winner?" She turned to find Janet Morris, a woman who'd worked at the same hotel years ago. They'd never been friends, but they'd been cordial colleagues. Now Janet's expression was sour. Hello, Janet. I heard about your little windfall. Must be nice to get rich off something you did nothing to earn." Sarah felt her jaw tighten. "I bought property legally, and found something on that property. That's how property ownership works. Sure, while the rest of us work actual jobs and struggle to pay bills, you get to play house with someone else's money. Real fair. Someone else's money? Sarah kept her voice level despite the anger rising. The government abandoned it 30 years ago. I went through months of legal proceedings to establish ownership, and before I found it, I was sleeping in my car with my orphaned niece. So please, tell me more about how easy I've had it. Janet's expression faltered slightly, but she rallied. Whatever. Must be nice to be lucky. It's not luck, Sarah said quietly. Not luck is random. This was me refusing to give up when everyone told me to. This was me bidding on property everyone else thought was worthless. This was me breaking through walls looking for possibilities. That's not luck. That's perseverance. She left Janet standing in the aisle and continued her shopping, hands shaking, but head held high. Let people think what they wanted. She knew the truth. The encounter that mattered most came 2 months after moving into the house. Sarah's mother called and asked if she could visit. Your father and I would like to see the house and spend time with Maya. They arrived on a Saturday afternoon, her mother carrying flowers, and her father looking uncomfortable in the way he always did when forced to confront emotional situations. Sarah showed them through the house, on watching her mother's eyes widen at each room. Sarah, this is beautiful, her mother said, voice soft with something that might have been remorse. They sat in the living room with coffee, while Maya played with Cooper in the backyard. Silence stretched, awkward and heavy, until Sarah's father cleared his throat. We were wrong, he said abruptly, about telling you to give up Maya, about saying you couldn't do it. We were wrong. Sarah's mother nodded, tears in her eyes. I was scared for you. I saw you struggling and I thought you needed to make practical choices. But you were making the right choice all along. You kept that little girl safe. You found a way. I'm proud of you. The words cracked something open in Sarah's chest. Thank you, she managed. Well, that means more than you know. Can you forgive us? Her mother asked. Sarah thought about it. She could hold on to the hurt, use it as a shield, let it justify distance, or she could choose healing. Yeah, she said finally. I can forgive you. We're family. That matters. They spent the rest of the afternoon together, her parents reading to Maya, her father throwing the ball for Cooper, her mother helping Sarah prepare dinner. It wasn't perfect. The hurt didn't disappear completely. But it was a beginning. As autumn turned to winter, life settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Maya thrived at school, making friends and bringing home art projects Sarah displayed proudly on the refrigerator. Cooper became Maya's constant companion, sleeping at the foot of her bed and greeting her enthusiastically when she came home each day. And Sarah established a foundation with David's help, focusing on helping single parents and homeless families. She donated to the food bank that had fed them, funded a shelter renovation at the church that had let her borrow a generator, gave Rosa a bonus that made the older woman cry. You don't have to do this, Rosa said. Yes, I do, Sarah replied. You helped me when no one else would. That matters. She also returned to the shelter one last time. It sat exactly as she'd left it, the concrete entrance still half hidden by brush, the steel door now rusted shut again. She stood there for a long time, thinking about the frightened woman who'd first opened that door, who'd bet everything on $1 and desperation. Thank you, she said quietly to the structure, for keeping us safe, for holding on to that secret, for changing everything. On Christmas morning, Sarah woke to Maya's excited voice calling from downstairs. She found her niece in front of the tree, Cooper beside her, both staring at the pile of wrapped presents with wonder. Is this all for me? Maya asked, voice hushed. Every single one, Sarah confirmed. They spent the morning opening gifts, the floor gradually disappearing under torn paper and ribbons. Maya squealed over dolls and art supplies and the bicycle Sarah had hidden in the garage. But the gift that made her cry was the photo album. Sarah had spent weeks putting it together, collecting pictures from Maya's parents, from family members, documenting her life from birth to present. The last page held a photo Sarah had taken just days ago of Maya and Cooper in the backyard, both smiling at the camera. So you never forget where you came from," Sarah said softly. "And so you always know how loved you are." Maya threw her arms around Sarah's neck, holding tight. "I love you, Aunt Sarah. I love you too, baby. So much." That afternoon, sitting by the fireplace, while Maya played with her new toys and Cooper napped in a patch of sunlight, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. 6 months ago, she'd been at rock bottom, homeless, desperate, convinced she'd failed at everything that mattered. She'd been judged, dismissed, told she wasn't capable of caring for the child she loved. And then she'd found that shelter. She'd placed a bid no one else wanted. She'd done the hard work of making an impossible situation bearable. She'd chipped away at a wall until it revealed something extraordinary. But more than the money, more than the house, or the security it represented, what mattered was what the discovery had proven. That perseverance mattered. That refusing to give up, even when every rational voice said it was hopeless, could lead to miracles. The fortune had been hidden for decades, waiting. And it had taken someone desperate enough, determined enough, stubborn enough to claim it. Sarah had been that person. Not through luck, but through the strength she hadn't known she possessed until circumstances demanded it. In the new year, Sarah started volunteering at a shelter for homeless families. She'd go once a week, bringing Maya sometimes, helping serve meals, and offering quiet support to people living the nightmare she'd so recently escaped. One evening, she met a young mother named Lisa, who reminded her painfully of herself months earlier. Lisa had 2 children, a car she was living in, and the desperate, hollow-eyed look of someone at the end of their rope. Sarah sat with her in the shelter's common area after dinner. "I know how hard this is," she said quietly. "I was where you are, not that long ago." Lisa looked at her skeptically. "I doubt that. 6 months ago, I was sleeping in my car with my 7-year-old niece. We were exactly where you are now. I know what it feels like to think there's no way out." "So how'd you get out?" Lisa asked, voice rough with exhaustion. "I took a chance on something everyone else thought was worthless, and I refused to give up, even when giving up would have been easier." Sarah paused. "I can't solve your problems for you, but I can tell you that sometimes the thing that saves you is the thing no one else sees value in. Keep looking. Keep trying. Don't let anyone convince you that you can't do this." She left Lisa with her contact information and a promise that if she needed help, Sarah would be there. It wasn't much. It wouldn't solve homelessness or poverty or any of the systemic issues that created situations like theirs. But it was something. And something was better than nothing. As winter deepened and spring began to show its first hints, Sarah took stock of her life. The numbers in her bank account still felt surreal, the security they represented almost impossible to fully comprehend. But what she'd built around that security felt real. A home, a family, a purpose. Maya was thriving, and her trauma slowly healing under the weight of stability and love. Cooper had become part of their family in the way good dogs do, essential and beloved. The house felt lived in now, filled with the comfortable chaos of normal life. One evening in early March, Sarah and Maya sat on the back porch watching the sunset. Cooper lay at their feet, occasionally thumping his tail against the deck. The air smelled of early spring, that particular scent of earth warming and things beginning to grow. "Aunt Sarah," Maya said. "Yeah, baby?" "Do you think my mom and dad would be happy? About how we live now?" Sarah pulled Maya close. "I think they'd be grateful you're safe and loved. I think they'd be proud of how strong you've been. And I think they'd want exactly what we have, a good life together." Maya nodded, satisfied. "I think so too." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars began appearing overhead. Sarah thought about Julie and David, about the accident that had taken them too soon, about the grief that still lived in quiet corners of her heart. But alongside the grief was gratitude. Gratitude that she'd been given the chance to keep Maya, to honor her sister's memory by raising her daughter. "You know what?" Sarah said suddenly. "What?" "I think we should plant a garden this spring. Flowers and vegetables, something we grow together." Maya's face lit up. "Can we grow strawberries?" "We can absolutely grow strawberries." They talked about gardens and summer plans, and all the ordinary things families discussed on quiet evenings. And in those ordinary moments, Sarah found something she'd stopped believing possible during those desperate months. Peace. Not the absence of struggle or pain. Those things were part of life and always would be. But peace with the journey. Peace with the choices she'd made. Peace with the person she'd become through hardship. The shelter had given her more than money. It had given her proof of her own resilience. It had shown her that she was capable of surviving anything, of finding hope in hopeless places, of turning a dollar and desperation into a life worth living. She'd been tested in ways most people never faced. She'd been stripped of security, judged by those who should have helped, pushed to the absolute edge of what she could endure. And she'd come through it not just intact, but stronger. The hidden fortune had changed the material circumstances of their lives, but the real transformation had happened before that. In the car where she'd kept Maya safe, in the concrete room where she'd refused to give up, in every moment she'd chosen to keep fighting when fighting seemed pointless. The money was a gift, yes, an extraordinary, life-changing gift. But the real gift was the knowledge that she'd earned it, not through the accident of discovery, but through the perseverance that led to that discovery, through the stubborn determination to break through walls, literal and figurative, to find what lay beyond. As the stars grew brighter overhead, Sarah made a silent promise. She would use this fortune wisely. She would help others the way she'd needed help, and she would raise Maya to understand that privilege came with responsibility, that having more meant giving more. But most importantly, she would teach Maya what the shelter had taught her. That circumstances don't define you. That hitting bottom doesn't mean staying there. That sometimes the thing that saves you is the thing you have to be brave enough to claim, even when everyone else thinks you're crazy for trying. Later that night, after Maya was asleep and Cooper was curled up beside her bed, Sarah stood at her bedroom window, looking out over the neighborhood. Lights glowed in windows up and down the street. Families settled in for the evening. Normal, ordinary lives unfolding in normal, ordinary homes. She was part of that now, part of the normal world. But she carried with her the memory of what it felt like to be outside that world, looking in, and she would never forget. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Foundation paperwork finalized. First grants ready to distribute. You're officially a philanthropist. Proud of you." Sarah smiled. A philanthropist. 6 months ago, the word would have been laughable. Now it was simply true. She thought about the families those grants would help, the children who'd eat better, the single parents who'd get childcare assistance, the homeless families who'd find their way into temporary housing. Each one a story, a struggle, a person doing their best with insufficient resources. She couldn't save everyone, but she could help some. And that would have to be enough. Before turning in for the night, and Sarah did something she'd started as a ritual. She opened the drawer of her nightstand and pulled out the first diary entry she'd written after the discovery. She'd started keeping a journal at David's suggestion, documenting the journey for Maya to read someday. She added a new entry. Today was ordinary. Maya did homework. We made dinner together. Cooper chased squirrels in the yard. These ordinary moments are what I fought for, what I survived for, and they're more precious than any fortune. The shelter saved us twice. Once by giving us refuge. Once by holding a secret that changed everything. But we saved ourselves through every choice to keep going, even when going seemed impossible. I hope Maya reads this someday and understands. Life will test her, circumstances will challenge her. But she comes from survivors, from people who faced impossible situations and found ways through them. That strength is her inheritance, more valuable than any amount of money. We started with nothing. We rose from nothing. And now we have everything that matters. Not because we were lucky, but because we refused to stop trying. That's the real treasure. Not gold or currency, but the knowledge that you're strong enough to survive anything. That's what the shelter taught me. That's what I'll teach Maya. And that's what I hope anyone reading our story takes away. When you're at your lowest, when everyone doubts you, when giving up seems like the only option, remember this. Sometimes the thing that saves you is hidden behind walls. You have to break through yourself. Sometimes fortune favors not the lucky, but the persistent. Keep fighting. Keep looking. Keep breaking through walls, because you never know what treasure might be waiting on the other side. Sarah closed the journal and returned it to the drawer. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new ordinary moments that added up to an extraordinary life. But tonight, she would sleep peacefully in her own bed, in her own home, with Maya safe down the hall and Cooper keeping watch. She'd started this journey homeless and desperate, placing everything on a $1 bet. And she'd won not just a fortune, but a future. The shelter had held its secret for decades, and when the time was right, when someone worthy of that secret finally arrived, it had given up its treasure to the woman who needed it most. Sarah Mitchell had bought a Cold War shelter for $1, and in return, it had given her everything. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.